Welcome to Bunto's Silent Dogfight, episode number 3. Tonight, our guest is Mr. Jeff Keller. Jeff Keller is from the Washington, D.C. area, and he's been on G Plus for 3 years. Characterizes himself as a guy on the internet. How you doing tonight, Jeff?
I'm doing well, thank you, and thank you for having me and showing interest in what I have to say. I appreciate
Oh,
that.
that's no problem, Jeff. Definitely. So, is it cold where you're at now?
It is wickedly cold. I would call it cold, and I think that's maybe the least controversial thing I'll say tonight. It was about 9 degrees here this morning, and I think it's climbed into the high teens or something like that.
Really, wickedly cold is, Bostonian, but true. I'd
Yeah,
characterize the
yeah,
freezing temperature as wicked.
yeah.
Well, let's jump right in, Jeff. I guess we'll take off with the theism versus atheism topic. I mean, what does anybody think? What do you think, Jeff? Theism versus atheism. Anything
Uh, well,
there, or is it played out?
it gets an awful lot of play on Google Plus, and I think it is a question that's important to a lot of people. There's the question of the truth question, whether or not this stuff is real or not, that we've been told about.
Of
But
course.
also, people sometimes a lot is being done in the name of religion. The impacts the question's a pretty enormous one, so I can see why it gets debated a lot, and it seems to be a very prevalent topic on Google Plus. To me personally, I
Hmm.
think the foremost question is it true or not? I think that's the foremost question in any issue, and I guess I categorize myself as a weak atheist in the sense that
Okay.
I just don't explicitly hold a theistic view, and that doesn't mean that I am on the fence, and it doesn't mean I'm an agnostic, which I actually don't think is a third way. I think, strictly speaking, literally speaking, if you're not religious or you don't hold that a deity exists or act as if one exists, I think that makes you an atheist, strictly speaking. One can be an atheist without actually taking a position or making a statement
Hmm.
against there being a God, but this is the way I look at it. So either you are or you aren't. So that's kind of how I approach it.
Very good, Jeff. Well, just talking about the subject itself, do you feel like it's the most approachable thing for the average guy off the street to walk in and say, "Is there a God or not a God?" So that's what attracts him to this subject on G plus. Like maybe the guy wants to stand up for God, like a believer who says, "Well, I'm hearing these people talk about God. I'm going to stand up for God." And then there's the, other end of that spectrum where somebody says, in my experience, there's most definitely no God.
Yeah, I think the way people argue over various issues varies. So I think there are people, and I like to keep myself in this category. I like to think I'm in this category, who really are just interested in thinking clearly about the world. As Matt Dillahunty says, he just wants to know more. Uh, he just wants to know. I'm getting this saying wrong. As many true things as
It's possible.
possible, and as few false things as possible. So I think that's the best way to approach the issue. I think whether one is an atheist or a theist, though, it's quite possible to get drawn into these discussions because of other underlying issues that people may have had. There are probably cases um, where somebody may be arguing with me from a theistic standpoint, but they're really arguing against somebody in their life that they didn't respect, and maybe they're just taking it out on me. And I think that happens with atheists as well. And
Good enough, Jeff. Okay, well, let's go ahead and leave that there, Jeff. We're just talking the outlines first to start off the interview, but your rep on the G Plus Great Debate community is also for being your libertarian stance, correct?
yes.
You have expertise and enthusiasm for the Ayn Rand and her philosophy, as well as merging that in very adeptly with critical thinking. When we do talk about the God question. So, which is more attractive to you, libertarianism or the God question?
Oh, libertarianism.
Oh, by far.
Yeah. Libertarianism, and I'll lump objectivism in there because objectivism is philosophy as a whole. So, if there is a God, that's an empirical question. Ultimately, I can accept that. I can accept reality, even aspects of it.
Okay.
Not that would be the case, but um, it, I would much rather see the world be a freer and safer, more peaceful place. And I think if it were, I think we could make these arguments much more uh, much more rationally and much more effectively than is being done now with wars and the horrible things that happened at the Paris newspaper and so
Yes.
forth. So,
Um,
so
so one is fantasy, and one is much more aligned with reality in your mind. Libertarianism, and then on the other hand, we talk about the Red Sea splitting and Noah's Ark and walking on water. Correct?
right. Of course, to be fair, some religious folks, and probably the majority of folks, will say that some of those stories that are in the Bible are parables and others
Metaphors.
metaphors, parables, and all that. And so I don't want to necessarily reduce all of that to Christianity. Although, personally, if you don't accept a God, I don't really accept the Bible as really being a reliable source of information as far as the nature of the world or reality or of the universe goes. So
Are you very polite to theism?
I'm polite in general. I think politeness is certainly the way to start off. I think assuming the best of people you talk to, that they're sincere, that they're honest and straightforward, or that they're somehow curious about the truth in yourself. I think that's the way to approach any kind of interaction. And I think most of the time I'm not disappointed. Occasionally I am, but I would rather assume the best in people than the worst.
Okay.
I think you get what you give, kind of.
Yes, it's true. Okay,
Yeah.
you do encounter very many arguments in this great debate community. Some of them not as succinct as your own. How did you arrive at that point?
How did I arrive on Google Plus? You mean, or just in the
Sure. How did
debates?
you arrive at the either one, on G plus or your succinctness?
Well, first on the G Plus, I heard about Google Plus Hangouts from a guy who was doing podcasts who would occasionally have a closed hangout with people that were just invited as opposed to a public hangout. And I really found that an amazing way to engage with people. Not only was it wonderful, it's intimate in that there's very few distractions. The people are on topic. They're smart people that are attracted to this. And I've actually met people through this way that I've only met this way, whom I consider to be very, very good friends.
Excellent. How long ago? How many years? Can you give a ballpark?
Yeah, you said 3. That's about right. 3.5 maybe. I was going to try to check some emails and figure out exactly when that was, but at least 3 years. I think a little bit more as far as that went. After I did that, some of those groups sort of waned and all that, and I still had an appetite for talking to smart people in this way, especially since I can do it on a 9-degree night. I don't have to.
Right.
I don't have to go out and get in my car or do anything. And so I started finding public hangouts and met some amazing people, and religious discussion. It kind of interested me that so many people like to talk about religion, and I like to talk about it too, but mostly in the context of critical thinking. Just what are valid truth claims,
Okay.
what aren't, and so that's kind of how I got on there and how it
You
appears.
got into interacting with others on a intelligent level.
Yeah.
And I believe you told me that you were involved with Toastmasters, and this is how you arrived at your succinctness as far as your coherency of the comments that you do offer when you're in these G plus hangouts.
Yes, I have, and I appreciate your assigning succinctness to me. Probably anybody who knows me can probably think of examples times when I wasn't that succinct. But I think Toastmasters helped me a lot. I was involved in communications before that. I was actually active in the Libertarian Party through the starting around in the early '90s. Got involved in the Libertarian Party.
Mm.
I was into activism, and I did some writing and some informal debating and on that. But you're right to point out I did start Toastmasters in around 2005, and that really helped me enormously, not just with technique, but learning how to speak in whatever time is allowed, with a beginning, middle, and an end. Make your point quickly. Stay on topic. I learned things like.
Oh, Jeff, could you just give the general about Toastmasters for all the audience members who really aren't
Sure.
familiar with the organization?
It's Toastmasters International. You can Google it. There's I think it is international. I think you can find a Toastmasters meeting most anywhere.
Okay.
I live in a sort of a medium-sized town in the suburbs, and there are 4 or 5 Toastmasters groups that meet. So you can go to them, try them out, see which one you like best. I joke that it's like Alcoholics Anonymous. You can always
Interesting.
you can always go to a meeting, and what they're very supportive. They're also I think I was paying about $60 a year, which is much less than any other kind of self-improvement course.
Okay, are they always positive, or are they controversial, or very benign?
I have most of them. Most of them, I've never given an atheistic speech. I did give a speech about objectivism one time.
Right.
But it's generally, most groups are suited for a general audience. So most of your talks, they can be a little edgy, and it depends on the group. But for the most part, it's just speaking, and we tend to
the formalities of speaking. Formalities.
Yeah, it's more about the formalities. I understand there are political groups and stuff, but I couldn't find one that was close by or anything like that. So unless you have a really focused group, and some of them are actually sponsored by corporations, and a few of them are closed, so they may be suited in particular to business interaction and stuff like that. But basically, you learn, just quickly, you learn public speaking. But even if you're not doing a speech, a well-run Toastmasters meeting will allow everybody in the meeting to speak in some way or another. So if you're a new person, you may just be the timer, but you have to stand up, introduce yourself, and give the timer report. And also, one of the things that I benefited a lot from Toastmasters was they teach you how to run a meetings, and how to run a meeting on a schedule, on a time frame, and this is an enormous skill if you're in the corporate world, because we've all been to meetings where we didn't have any defined agenda.
True. And
some people, the discussion was either way too long or too short. And
I remember when I was in the corporate world, my manager gave the same meeting over and over and over. So you learned the meeting after 2 months, what meeting he was giving. All right, Jeff, you had some dabblings in the political realm. You were fervently political. Could you please tell us about that?
Yeah. Well, if you want my whole political odyssey, it spans several decades.
In a nutshell, please.
Yeah. Okay. So the one that stuck, I dabbled with leftism and rightism in my younger years, but I discovered libertarianism in the early 90s, or discovered that. I like to say I discovered that I was always a libertarian. I just didn't know it.
All right.
So I discovered libertarianism, which is, just in a nutshell, you can say a lot about libertarianism. There's been a lot of big works about it. The ethical argument for libertarian is, or the ethical principles are, number one, that you own yourself. Nobody else owns. Nobody else owns you.
Fair enough.
Which is obviously, that would preclude slavery and a lot of other terrible things. The other side of the coin is that you don't get to initiate force against other people.
Okay.
And we use the word initiate because if somebody initiates force against you, we do recognize that you have the right to defend yourself. So we have those two things, and most people don't think those things are terribly complicated or controversial, but we really are rigorous about applying them to just about everything, or actually everything, if you get right down to it. So that's the essence of it. A lot of people will make just real quickly, a lot of people will make the libertarian case on consequentialist grounds or utility grounds
All right.
in that it's efficient, it's economically efficient. We it's the system most likely to achieve results. So there's kind of these two arguments. I think they're both part of the story. I prefer the moral argument in terms of I wouldn't say that if owning others made the gross national product higher, I still wouldn't condone owning others. So
All right.
I think the moral argument is the most important argument. But the fact that happily that libertarianism is both right in my judgment and that it works is a happy coincidence, and I like to talk about how it works because if people
And
think,
that it works. All
yeah,
right, Jeff. This is a global philosophy. Other cultures, admit to libertarianism being right.
we would certainly apply it globally, and the beautiful thing about libertarianism is that it doesn't really tell anybody how to live. So um, you could, if you wanted to, for example, if you believed in Marxism and you wanted to have a society, you wanted to have a community rather that was a mutual aid community or where there was communal ownership of things, then you would be, as long as you didn't force anybody, didn't kidnap anybody, bring them in there, or keep them in there against their will. If you set up that kind of community, then that would be compatible with libertarianism. You could
I
do
see.
that. But as long as you honestly acquire whatever resources you have, whatever property, whatever land, it's yours, and that's perfectly fine. So it's definitely something we would apply to the world. It's that sort of philosophy has been more prevalent in some parts of the world than others. You could certainly make the case.
I
I
see.
think.
Okay. Well, the thing I bring up, you characterize it as the freedom philosophy.
Mhm.
Now, our culture, we do believe in democratic principles, but other cultures, let's say Iran, how would they, see the libertarian stance? I mean, could they understand it? Would any of those cultures that know are for theocracy or any sort of totalitarian regime ever understand something as basic as you laid it out, libertarianism?
Well, certainly some societies are more closed than others. That's the great challenge. So we want to we want to peacefully, of course, infiltrate those societies with our thinking and our ideas. So a closed society may not be
How does
as
the
exposed to
theocracy? How does the theocracy go libertarian? Could you explain that?
libertarian just says you can't force anybody to do anything. If everybody's in your community or your landmass or whatever happens to be theocratic, then it's consensual and it's libertarian. In fact, about half of the libertarians in some of the polls I've seen are religious to some degree or another. But religion, I'm sorry, libertarianism
Mhm.
is really about is it voluntary or not. And
Okay.
as long as you're not forcing people to be religious or anything like that, that can be perfectly religion. You can be Islamic and be libertarian. You can be any kind of religion as long as you don't forcibly. And through force, by the way, I mean that in a very narrow sense of physical
Coercion.
force.
Coercion.
Coercion. I don't mean persuasion or that's adults at times have to figure out what's a good way to go. But I'm really talking about physical compulsion, either through the state or privately. That's what would be in opposition. But yeah, so, some cultures, some people in some cultures are more exposed to to uh, to libertarianism, to freedom in general. I've heard stories in the Soviet Union. I know some people who were in the Soviet Union, but when it was still around, and that you got the death penalty if you read something like Human Action or Milton Friedman
Anthem.
or any kind of Anthem or any of Ayn Rand's novels or uh, uh, Mises's Human Action, things like that. That stuff had to be smuggled in, so that was an
True.
enormous challenge.
Now,
But
Jeff, would you say that libertarianism, as you described, the freedom philosophy, eschews centralized government of any sort, be it theocracy or even democratic?
um, That's very divided in libertarianism. So some libertarians would hold that there would be a minimal government, that you need a minimal government um, to have the courts and police and stuff like that, and to have really those are the courts, the police, and whatever defensive agencies that are needed to protect the rights of the people within that society. A lot of people would say that you can even privatize those things, and that's the ideal, because if you have a small libertarian government, there's some degree of coercion involved necessarily to finance it. Otherwise, it's not a government.
I see.
So I don't really get into. I think if somebody wants to reduce the government by 95%, we can haggle over the last 5%.
Okay, so you believe in the minimalist government? What's wrong with America? Please tell me, Jeff. What's wrong?
What's wrong with America? I don't know. Well, the wars are wrong. I think the wars are very wrong. I think the foreign policy has been horrendous, and I think it's part of the problems that we're facing with the rest of the world, the Middle East in particular.
Okay.
So I think those are all big topics, but I think the fact that the U.S. has gone much farther away from its essentially libertarian positions that it began with.
Essentially libertarian position. Okay.
Yeah.
So we would get closer back to these roots if we reduced our government 95%.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a numeric figure, but if you hold that the government does have some legitimate things that it does, it's more instructive to say that if the government stayed out of economics, if it stayed out of other countries, except to the extent that they defended themselves against other countries, that the world would be a much more peaceful place, and that we would all be freer. And also, if the government was completely separated from economics, so you would have.
Why is that a good thing? Please explain. Why is that a good thing, Jeff?
Because people trade when they trade in their self-interest. They are the stakeholders, and they're the ones that benefit when they succeed, but they're the ones that lose when they fail. And when the government decides who the winners and losers are, and when the people who make those decisions aren't the actual stakeholders, you have really lousy decision making that happens in an economy, and it causes the kinds of booms and busts that we all have. There's no reason why there has to be so much unemployment and bad conditions today than there were 10 years ago. The soil is the same, the air is the same, and all these things. And what we would argue, and this is really going to the Austrian theory of economics, is that you don't have a serious business cycle in a free economy. You have you may have particular industries because it's a constantly changing economy. Like when you had horse and buggies, all of a sudden, when cars started becoming commonplace, when Henry Ford learned how to make cars cheaply for the average person,
okay,
the horse and buggy business dropped, but the car industry went up. So it's kind of like waves.
Interesting example, Jeff. I like to know, Jeff. Okay, we take our government out of the economy, and where does justice come from in the libertarian society? Do we have to privatize our justice system, privatize our fairness ideals that they did have in the Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights? Where does fairness come from in the libertarian society?
Well, the libertarian society outlines what it means to be fair, and fairness is a tricky word too. So we're looking for, I think, a free and just society.
Okay.
The reason I make that stipulation is, it's not fair that I'm not 7 feet tall and don't play for the Lakers. But in terms of how people are treated, they're treated as sovereign beings and equals in the sense of their value as human beings.
I see.
That kind of fairness is definitely.
Who delimits that in the libertarian society, Jeff? Is there a court, or is there? no courts.
Yes, if there was no government, people who are what would be known as anarcho-capitalists would say that um, that there would be a demand for dispute resolution and courts, and that the market would provide these things. And when it's a voluntary market, see, unlike today, where actually the last statistic I heard was only about 3% of the cases actually get to government courts because either people have to wait too long, you have to spend your whole life savings to get there. Most cases are solved. Most non-criminal cases are solved outside of court because of the terrible system. You don't know if you're going to get a fair shake. You don't know how things are going to turn out. So if you had competing dispute resolution firms, they would actually have to compete for reputation, for fair rulings, to have that kind of reputation of being above board. And it's a very minor comparison, but let's say we have in the free market various accreditation firms. You can get private accreditation.
I
That's
see what you're
the
saying.
government does licensing and stuff like that now. You can get that done, but we also have private arbitration now, so it's not a theoretical thing at
I see,
all.
but the overall, in the general, our justice system would be privatized in the liberty.
That would be the libertarian ideal for some people who hold the anarcho-capitalist view. I happen to think there's a pretty good case to make that if we were philosophically libertarian, that most of what that the government services that are worthwhile, that are of value to people, that they would pay for those things privately, which would bring them into the competitive marketplace and would have people competing on the basis of their reputation and, as you said, and properly are using the word, their fairness and stuff like that in
Right.
terms of rendering correct decisions, not being an activist from the bench or something like that,
Very
but
good.
but
Okay,
restorative justice where people are compensated to the best that they can be on this world, which is not perfect, but
fair
um,
enough, Jeff.
but we don't have perfection now either. So
Jeff,
yeah.
people that manipulate the system, how
Mhm.
does that stop in the libertarian system with privatized justice?
Can you give me, just so I know what you're talking about?
Oh,
Can
well,
you?
I was thinking like, in our system, I know that they say they bribe the politician, or the politicians are in the pocket of the corporations, and they pass, laws and any sort of litigation they can quash that would be, against the interest of the big corporates. Like
Yeah,
they
that's
build the fertilizer plant next to the old folks' home, and it blows up, and all the liability, they've already passed laws saying that you can't, the company that holds it's out of state, there's no liability against them. That's what I mean. They have manipulated the system to where they can get off with, what would you say, things that are definitively against the interest of the society on the whole. They manipulate the
well,
system.
that's an example that involves aspects of the state that libertarians don't condone. So
Right.
the other thing that I would hold, I'm not sure every libertarian holds this view, but to me, I don't think you would have. I don't think the idea of a corporation as is currently defined is a libertarian concept, because what a corporation does is, first of all, it's a limited liability arrangement. So for some reason now, if you sign up, you go to Delaware or whatever, incorporate. Most people incorporate in Delaware.
Okay.
You have, and leftists make this criticism, and I think it's a correct one. You've actually created this person that is very very much unliable for any criminal activities that they may have.
Yes.
Being negligent and having your plant blow up is something that the office holders of the corporation, if they were negligent, all the negligent parties, they should have to pay. When the when the Gulf is polluted by oil,
Right.
did anybody from BP get lose their house or whatever to help pay the
The
fishing
cost.
industry or whatever? And there were other aspects of that story too. It wasn't there was if you read about it, I won't get into the details, but there were other aspects. The government insisted that they drill where they did, and BP wasn't necessarily comfortable with their ability to respond to a spill. But you can talk about the
Right.
details. But in general, the corporation is not something that's libertarian. It's basically another thing that the government can tax. So that's why they're set up, and they benefit the people that are involved. So a lot of people think because libertarians are free market that we're just pro business unconditionally, It's
Yes.
nothing of the kind. We just want to apply the same rules to business. We neither want to inhibit their rights to peacefully transact, nor do we want to give them additional rights to plunder people and injure them, or we want them to be responsible as well.
Okay, well, let's say what the image that people get of libertarians today here in America would be something like the Tea Party, where they're not going to take my gun. They'll take my gun out of my cold hands, and they bring the machine gun, to any sort of public rally to display it. They want to impeach, our sitting president for any sort of, perceived transgression. Is that the image of libertarianism in America, the Tea Party?
I hope not.
We can hope not.
Well, I think that if I remember the history of the Tea Party was kind of something that Ron Paul's campaign.
Oh, were you ever in the Tea Party?
I went to the one Tea Party in my local town, and I saw a few libertarians, but I saw right-wing politicians, conservative politicians, pro-war politicians, a lot of pro-war people,
Pro-war.
a lot of anti-immigration people, which is also
Yes.
not a libertarian principle. So while I think there are some good people in the Tea Party who want, and I don't think, I mean, we can all make fun of somebody with a machine gun, and I don't think anybody needs a machine gun in public personally.
At a political rally.
But I am generally in favor of gun rights, and but this to me, the Tea Party has become something of a kind of a right-wing conservative thing. There were, like I said, at my thing, there were right-wing talk show hosts. It was very nationalistic, which is not necessarily a libertarian ideal either. So I was not much more impressed with the Tea Party than I was the Occupy movement. I thought it had many of the same problems. Really bad economic
theory.
Economic literacy is a real problem in America and throughout the world. So I don't really associate the Tea Party with libertarianism at all.
Would you characterize the Tea Party as a subversive organization?
No, maybe there are people within the Tea Party, but it's a political set of ideals.
I see.
I think if I were in power and I were in the crosshairs, not literally, but if I were, if I'm sure, anyone's political opponents seem to be subversive, but I think they have a right to express themselves just like anybody else, just like the Occupy folks.
Okay.
And
taking a look at our Congress, how it's it is all Republican Tea Partiers, just the House. Okay, I mean, do they subvert the values and the aims of what they're supposed to be doing there? They're like the least effective Congress of all time. They don't do anything.
Well, I think they do things, but I wish they would do less.
You wish they could even do less. Yeah. I mean, how does that?
Unless they should repeal a lot of things. Well, government's way too big and too involved in people's lives now.
Oh, so you agree with the sort of deadlock that we have right now in Congress?
Yeah, I have to say, I guess given the choice, we had in 1994 there was a Bill Clinton was the president.
Right.
You probably remember. They had Bill Clinton was all set to nationalize health care, and Hillary Clinton was meeting with in back rooms with people to orchestrate all of this, and there was a big the Clintons. They're excellent politicians, but they seem to be dead in the water. And then there was a huge Republican landslide in both houses.
Newt Gingrich.
Hadn't happened in my lifetime, and they were not great. They had a contract with America,
right?
And they buckled on just about the whole platform. But there was enough gridlock and opposition that Bill Clinton actually was probably one of the less interventionist presidents in the market. Not because he wanted to be, but because he had a balanced budget and all this kind of stuff. And I think
so you think the balanced budget came from the gridlock?
Yes, I do actually. Yeah, I think the Clintons had as big political ambitions as anybody. Similar thing happened with Jimmy Carter in '78 when he was
That's
overthrown. So I like divided government, and to me the best, from what I've seen, it kind of works best if you have a Republican Congress and a Democratic uh,
yeah, because
president.
they ignore the president, and
Yeah,
they have the
and
situation
because
we have now. They don't do anything.
well, but what happens in politics though is, let's say you have a liberal that you like, and you elect him, and you have conservative Congress people, and they have their agenda. So what happens if there's a minority party? Is it's just log rolling. You give me my stuff, and I'll okay your stuff. And the gridlock situation is kind of nice for that. You don't have that log rolling as much, and so you don't get, you kind of, at least it's it doesn't, the government has never shrunk in size. So everybody says,
Well,
oh,
I believe
it's
there's reasons. Right? Okay, but Jeff, let's go ahead and leave that there because I
sure.
know in my mind I could just why, or let's say just reveal the dismalness of our system right now. But let's go back to something interesting
Which I
about
think we would agree about, but for different
right.
reasons.
Thank you. About
Yeah.
the theism atheism arguments. An outfit called Atheism Plus.
Yeah.
Could you please tell me what you know about those folks? And just give us a
Yeah,
general.
I remember a few years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was in a secular humanist group, so I sort of remember when it came out,
Okay.
and it immediately turned me off because it sounded like, and maybe it has evolved differently. I have not followed it. I'm actually not that active in the humanist movement either, but to my recollection, it was about bringing other ideas and lumping them in with atheism. So people were tired of saying,
Philosophies.
yeah, they were coming up with this sort of thick atheism that it's not just about whether or not there's a God, it's about equality, and it's about a kind of a lot of ideas. And I'm not really opposed to equality as such if it's properly defined, um, but this was lumping a lot of what I consider to be very leftist ideas into the atheist movement.
All
So
right.
I don't know. I didn't think it was devastating. I think the only danger when that happens, and I think this happens sometimes in libertarian circles, where somebody will come along and say, well, atheism, libertarianism is about how you raise your child and stuff like
Right.
that, and then all of a sudden people are really scratching their heads because they think, well, I'm a libertarian, but I don't want to raise my child that way, or I don't want to eat vegetables or whatever. So
True.
that I think if you're not clear about it, um, so so I don't know. It was certainly not for me. I thought it probably, if people weren't really clear as to what it was, I thought it might have a negative
Well,
effect on
let's
atheism.
suppose, does libertarianism lend itself to atheism? Could it have become a facet of Atheism Plus?
Yeah, actually, libertarianism in the narrow sense is strictly about government, the role of government. So there's
All
nothing
right.
incompatible with libertarianism um, about what religion you're in or not. It's about um, I'll also point out that under libertarianism, schools are private. So yes, there can be religious schools, but
Okay.
you don't have to be at your neighbor's throat because he wants his kid to be taught, Hinduism or
Noah's Ark. I mean,
baptism or Noah's Ark, and you want your kid to be taught not those things. And so you don't have to be at odd. He can take his child to that school, and I think kids should learn a certain way, but we want the world to be a peaceful place. So if my school gives out a better result, maybe
I
they'll bring
see.
their kids to
Well,
my
well,
school.
let me ask you this, Jeff. How do you like your atheism? Do you like it pure, nothing, but dealing with, atheism versus theism? Or do you want this, idea that atheism plus, they wanted to sort of make it like a lifestyle philosophy? Do you like that approach, or you just like, compartmentalization of, views? It got too complicated for atheism plus. That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, and some people, I don't think I was the only one, but I can see why it did. If people like me who are atheists, and I'm concerned about some of the issues that atheists are concerned about. If it's got all this extra baggage. Now, I'd been around long enough to know that that wasn't the case, so you can be an atheist. I was in a secular humanist group where most of the people were left-leaning, I think it's fair to say. But
Do you think it was like an exercise in activism? They says, hey, let's come out with atheism plus, and then let's try to bring in all the activists. So they went feminism, equality.
Yeah, I think groups can tend to get really insulated, and if probably the typical group of secular humanists probably do believe those things. For whatever reason, atheism seems to be more prevalent on the left than the right, I think, in general.
Right.
But I do encounter libertarians, but I think if you get really insulated with a lot of people, you kind of think, well, atheism is reasonable, and all of these reasonable people agree with me, so yeah, feminism must be part of atheism.
I see.
So I think it's just
when that happened, when you were in the libertarian organization, the political party, when that happened, did you say, hey, we're only about libertarianism, we're not about gun rights, advocacy, you know what I mean? Like what happened to the Tea Party? Let's say if that started happening to your libertarian organization, would you have objected to it? The anti-immigrant stance.
I think gun rights is a pretty basic libertarian principle, so I wouldn't be opposed to that. I take sort of the reverse. I think being a libertarian does mean something, and people will argue over that. And some people are libertarian about some issues and not others. So
that's right.
I would say that people who think that drugs should be legalized or decriminalized, whatever word they want to use, I think that's a libertarian position on the drug war. That doesn't mean they're libertarian about a lot of other things. They could be very pro-war or whatever. I've always liked, and not all libertarians are like this, but I've always been very willing to join common cause. So
all right.
I had no problems at all with going to anti-war movements and marching with communists and all kinds of this, because it was about ending the wars, and so I had no problems with that. I didn't have to compromise my views. It was a focused activity, and I met a lot of people, and I think on net I put my best foot forward when people knew I was a libertarian, and hopefully libertarianism, the people that like me, they maybe softened on libertarianism a little bit, but that wasn't my agenda. I think you can have common cause with people, but I think it's a mistake to water your message. You end up watering your core message down if you attach too much stuff that's not really relevant to it. And I think just these. Some would argue that humanism is about more than atheism, and maybe that's true. I don't know, but I just didn't. It wasn't something that would have appealed to me if I was new to the movement.
Now, Jeff, when you engage people in common cause, like let's say you go to a G+ hangout and you're sharing your views with other participants, how do you deal with people that are, how would you say, not as, what would you say, open to your what do you say, egalitarian type of viewpoint? That they just are willfully ignorant, evasive. I mean, how do you deal with some of these G+ hangout participants? I mean, what are the tips that you could tell our listeners?
Well, first of all, I come on here to enjoy myself, so
okay.
I am not the least bit concerned about whether people agree with me. It's always nice if you can find common cause. I find something to agree about. I think the only times I would say, and this happens very rarely, if you find somebody whose frame of decency, I'm not talking about their ideology, but for example, if I'm talking to somebody about anti-war and they say something like, well, I just think we should nuke them all.
All right.
I push back at that point. Like I say, well, I'm hoping you didn't mean that, but if you really do mean that you really would want to indiscriminately kill millions of people. I really don't feel like I have any common sense of decency with you that we're talking about anything leading to an outcome that and I both would find acceptable. So I think I'd really like to just withdraw from this conversation. And but aside from that, I think most of us want people to be prosperous. They want people to be healthy. They want people to have access to health care and all those things.
All right.
No, and I don't, and they will disagree with me vehemently as to which course of action to get there is the correct one. But I think.
Well, could you have a conversation with a nihilist?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Somebody who has I find most people who say they're nihilists aren't, because they'll come up with all kinds of things that ought to be this or ought to be that. And I had somebody call me to say they're a neo-nihilist, and they came up with all these oughts. And to me, literally, if you're a nihilist, you're really rejecting all standards and all kind of morals. So yeah, that's. If somebody literally is a nihilist, and I don't think too many people really are actually, that would be a really tough one, because how can you talk about what's right or wrong if there's no such thing as right or wrong?
True. All right. When you participate in G Plus Hangouts, well, how many do you do, Jeff? Usually a week. Let's just give a ballpark.
Well, actually, I'm trying to cut down. No, I'm just kidding. I probably do. One every other day on average.
So let's say 4 or 5 a week.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're engaging with other people, giving your viewpoint and seeing the soundness of their arguments. What do you enjoy about that? I mean, are you strengthening your arguments or actually opening your mind up to what they are saying?
Well, most of the time, I work with a small set of principles. So it takes quite a lot for me to change my core principles. Like, I haven't had anybody convince me that under any circumstances it's okay for somebody to own another person. But I have had people correct me about points of fact or things in history that I may have been mistaken about or not been entirely clear about, and I welcome that. I think I approach topics with enough humility that I'm not setting myself up to look like a jerk for getting some fact wrong or whatever. But perhaps I have at a time or two. I don't know. But anyway, that's kind of the.
Well, let's just imagine.
I like the conversation. I like people who try to challenge me, because when I'm with a bunch of atheists. Or a bunch of atheists, we tend to agree on things, and when that gets boring, they start hitting me with libertarianism. But even when I was I went to college kind of late, but my teacher found out I was a libertarian, my professor, and the focus of the class was on argumentation and critical thinking, so I was like the class foil, and it would be nearly the entire class against me, but I noticed after a while that there were people who would quietly, what you said. There were the people that would just pelt me, and they wouldn't budge. But there were people who were observing that said, that made a lot of sense. So
yeah, that you had a valid point. Well, that's a great point you bring up, Jeff. Okay, so to come to my mind is that you are growing in your G Plus experience of sharing, but the other end of that spectrum is to where you burn out. And I've talked to other people that have burned out and put it to the side. Have you ever had a straw that broke the camel's back experience, where you just gave up Hangouts for a duration? As of late.
I've been on a lot of Hangouts, and I would say maybe 3 or 4 times I left feeling that really was unpleasant. I didn't.
Maybe that you're wasting your time.
Well, I never blamed all of Hangouts or all the people, but for the most part, there have been times when I've said, that didn't go well, and right. I don't have a warm fuzzy feeling right now, and I really don't. I really want to wait a week or so before I interact with that person. And almost invariably, when I have the person's, most of the people that I've had those encounters with, we laugh about it now. It's like,
Right.
um, uh, and it's like nothing happened the next day. But I think the important thing to realize is if you're talking about philosophy or you're talking about politics, you're thinking about really ingrained beliefs that people hold. It's not like we're talking about. I mean, people get upset about football. Some
Yes.
of my family members, they talk about football like like I talk about religion or whatever. But for the most part, you're talking about stuff that's going to really rattle some people's cages, make them not only think about themselves and their own views, but maybe their authority figures in their lives, their priests, their
Well, it challenges their validity. That's what the
um,
first thing they're going to say.
yeah, and if they don't see, that's why I think the moral argument is really important. So we can argue all day long about the minimum wage or something like that, but people still have to think it's right. That's
Okay.
one thing I'm learning. You have to tell people that this is right. You can't just tell them that we'll make more uh, iPods under capitalism than
Right.
socialism or
Well,
fascism.
what they aim at as if you challenge their core belief system of believing in a deity, believing in God, that's what I've seen in all our hangouts sets off the fireworks. Now, what I'm just looking at from outside observers, Jeff. I mean, it is you. Don't you believe it's essential for you to be able to communicate with your fellow man? How do I say essential, but at least incumbent on your experience in the social realm of offering feedback to another person. One way of doing it is through the hangout. You know,
Yeah, I think I missed the first part of your point. I'm really sorry. I had to respond to something
well,
real quickly.
how can I say it's sort of like when you engage in a hangout, don't you feel that it's in everybody's better interest that you contribute to the conversation?
I do. I like to have something meaningful to say, so I have gotten into Hangouts, and people were there's some very scholarly theists and atheists who talk a
Right.
lot about Bible verses and context and translations. I generally don't feel like I have a lot to add to that conversation, and so I will
Me neither.
usually listen in, and I have learned a lot from theists and atheists about those things. The Bible is an extraordinary literary work, and it's historic in the sense that it's old. So it's definitely of interest. I don't attach the same significance to it, but I generally try to not say things when I don't have anything to say.
Right. Well, I was thinking
Uh,
about, let's say, some of our audience members that are just, discovering Google Hangouts and maybe are actually, watching them as observers, but not really participating. I mean, would you encourage them to, try participating?
yeah,
Offering some
well,
viewpoint?
yes, definitely. Whatever somebody has to add, I think most conversations would be better if people ask more questions than just stating their position. I think it's
Okay.
it's good to know somebody's context, but in a conversation, I want to know what your context is and what your views are, why you hold them, and so on. And hopefully, if engaging you that way maybe the first time you actually thought about it from A to Z, and you may find out there's some aspect of it that you hadn't thought about, and that's you should admit that. I hadn't really.
Okay.
That's really interesting. I'm not ready to change my view, but that's a really interesting point you brought up, etc. But for people who are new and shy, the nice thing is you can go on and say hello and just kind of listen until you feel like jumping in. You
Yes,
can
that's a
also
benefit. You can, actually make
yeah.
friends. Okay, Jeff, and you piloting this airplane of social interaction, do you ever feel like you maybe, frustrate more people often than not when you participate in hangouts? Sometimes I feel that way, when I offer my observations that they, maybe don't understand them right off the bat or take them as aggressive comments. I go into the hangout and then I say there is no God, so forth. When you offer observations, you personally, do you feel like you are that type of individual, or did you try to, maintain
Yeah.
some sort of politeness towards?
No, I think I've aggravated a lot of people in Hangouts, not intentionally. I've been polite in most cases, but a lot of people a lot of people reject the ideas that I put out there. So
yes, specifically
and I
that
and I
rejection.
it depends on who's in the Hangout, of course. But no, I've been on where it's been 9 against 1, and um, I don't think I've made very many enemies, though. I think
I see.
people do tend to think I'm sincere, even if they don't accept. Uh, well,
Well, I'm trying to suppress on the audience members that when you're, do not feel like it's surprising that your ideas get rejected. You know.
no, most people think there should be a minimum wage. I've had many an argument about the minimum wage. Um, Free will is an argument that's
Yes,
usually
free will.
9 to 1. Oddly enough, and I don't know why this is, but atheists seem to be more on the determinist side of things than I am. I certainly hold that we have a limited range of free will. For example, people, I've had many people. They just get the minimum wage is to me it's one of the more simple economic principles, but people get really upset of it, and I really think they just they just don't think it's right not to have a minimum wage. It's charitable to me to say this, but I don't think they think clearly about this issue, because the economics of it for upwardly mobile people, if you want upward mobility and you want people to climb the ladder from the bottom rungs, sometimes we don't all start at the same wage. We don't have the same productivity, and to keep people from climbing that ladder from wherever they can, it does not raise their income. If their
I
productive
see what you're saying.
output.
Well, anyway, I was just talking in the general, Jeff, about
Yeah, I know. I did get on a tangent there. Giving
when
an example.
present things that are rejected, how to, as a participant, don't be shocked and quit, take your ball and go home. All right, well, we're talking about Google Hang. Why don't we just jump the tracks completely? And I know that you're an enthusiast about cars, correct?
Oh yeah, certain ones more than
Oh,
others.
could you please, just for the benefit of our audience, just give me a little of the nutshell of your background in cars, your family ones.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with my family. So first of all, I was born in the '60s, closer to the beginning of the '60s than the so I'm most nostalgic about and most aware and knowledgeable of the cars that ran from sort of my early upbringing, the cars that were on the road. So there were a lot of '50s cars still on the road. So I basically I'm basically most knowledgeable about American cars from the '50s through the '70s, really,
Okay.
with some interests. As far as my background goes, my father was worked for Cadillac division of General Motors for 16 years, and then he bought a dealership that he owned for a short time. Unfortunately, during the Carter Reagan recession era, and I would lump Nixon in there because I think he caused it, but primarily. But anyway,
No, that's a good.
I got an early economic lesson just to stick that in there about money and credit. So it was a personal event, but I was involved in that aspect of the business and the retail business for a while, and so I was surrounded by cars and loved them, and I was also my grandfather was the chairman or the director or whatever. He was the top guy in interior styling in General Motors from 70s back to the 30s. I think he started in 1930.
Wow.
And,
So he knew Mr. Ford?
No, he worked for General Motors. He may have met Henry Ford.
Met him.
I'm sure he probably met one of the Fords. He worked for a guy named Harley Earl, who's kind of known in car circles, who was kind of synonymous with styling, car styling. Back in the Henry Ford days, and Henry Ford was an absolute genius, and he made he's a great example. He's not the nicest guy, a greedy capitalist, a bit of an anti-Semite, but he enriched people of all walks of life by making affordable cars for them. And people, the average person couldn't have a car, and that changed people's lives enormously.
True.
But to dovetail it into the styling thing, cars were pretty much designed by engineers. They were much more functional than they were stylistic. And Harley Earl was hired out of Hollywood, California. He was a custom coach builder, so Hollywood celebrities and people like that, they could afford to have, if Fatty Arbuckle wanted a custom coach on his Duesenberg or whatever. He probably wouldn't mess with a Duesenberg, but something less than that.
Right.
He would put a custom coach on it. And General Motors hired him in the late 20s, and he hired my grandfather pretty early on too. And my grandfather was instrumental in starting the styling studio.
I see. Oh, that's wonderful.
Back then, the GM had the first in-house styling department. And it's funny, the engineers, they all thought this was really sissy and foo-foo and all.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, the thing that struck my mind is that there's tracks there. You have styling and then right hand in hand with economics.
Right.
And that's what I think is wonderful about that.
Right, and they had to make something cost-effective and appealing to audiences. So Mr. Earl is known for he spearheaded the LaSalle automobile. He had his hand in the styling of all the General Motors cars, but specifically, he was really the father of the LaSalle. That doesn't mean he was designed everything about it, but he shepherded that into production, and that was his vision. The Corvette was largely
wonderful cars. Okay, well, we've got your bona fides in the car realm. Let's zoom up, Jeff, all the way to 2008. Could you please tell our audience what happened to the car industry in 2008?
It's what happened in 2008 probably started with World War II, and that
theories, ideas.
There were quite a lot of car makers before World War II. During the war, all the manufacturers shut down, they made munitions and stuff like that. At least General Motors did, and that created a huge bubble effect after the war. So the car industry really mushroomed and all of that. And keep in mind also that after the war, the would-be competitors of the U.S. were both destroyed, and took many years to catch up. So there were no German cars. There were few German cars being made that would compete with the American cars, and there were no Japanese cars, of course, to compete, or few or practically none, as far as I know. So General Motors had quite a run. The
General Motors became General Motors.
Ford, Chrysler, and all of them. They had pretty much, they were a triopoly. There were other lesser manufacturers that kind of eventually all went by the wayside.
Okay.
But they had quite a run, and people in the organization would tell you that styling and customer preference and stuff like that stagnated. The cars there was an overemphasis on styling and not
practicality, functionality. There was a degradation.
The engineers, the chassis and the engines didn't change for decades in significant ways. It was all really about styling and features and stuff like that. So when the oil crisis happened, for example,
all right,
the Japanese were making very efficient cars, and this caught the car makers, the General Motors, flat-footed. Now all of a sudden you don't want to. They were. I do have a little bit of. They were concerned about the size of the cars before, and they were going to downsize them a little bit, and they actually did that from 1960 to 61. But
okay, Jeff, we're talking about car quality, really, but industry. How did the industry cave in 2008? I mean,
it was a combination. During this time, the market was so great, and it was such a long-standing bubble that the unions would make demands, and the car companies knew that they could pretty much pass them along to the consumers. So the cost of labor mushroomed. I mean, you had people on assembly lines making over 100,000 a year, and I'm not against people making a good living, but
They were always used to
that,
being well paid.
they were highly paid. Henry Ford paid him.
Henry Ford paid him $10 an hour in the
He
20s.
paid. Yeah, I think it was $5 a week or something. Like, whatever it was a lot of money. But at the time, and that's fine. You pay to have
Skilled
good
workers.
workers, and it costs to train new ones. So he had a better idea, as the slogan goes, and he paid his people well. But that was dwarfed by the union. The union demands priced the automobiles out of the global market, and so the GM and Ford and Chrysler, they've all been in decline since the 70s. And
So 2008 rolled around. How was the reckoning in your mind?
well, they were in bank. Well, now part of this has to do with the economy, and you could argue that actually, actually the car makers may not have made it as long because interest rates were artificially held down.
Okay.
But just like when because a car is something most people buy on time, and when interest rates are low, that's almost a de facto bubble and subsidy to that industry.
Well, how about I ask you this, Jeff? Was there real worth in General Motors, in Ford? Was there actual? What was the worth on paper? Was that accurate? Because what happened was we found them all untenable at their level.
Right. Well,
their credit level. I mean, their bonds got degraded, and they,
right. Well, they were
structure.
They just weren't. They weren't profitable. They were losing money.
Right. They were never profitable.
Right. Well, they were profitable for several decades, but they were not.
I mean, currently.
But in current times, there was the real estate crash. There were all kinds of things going on. There's reasons why it happened at this particular point, or why it came to a head at this particular point.
Were you glad that happened as a libertarian? Were you glad 2008 happened to the automotive industry?
No, and I wouldn't have supported the bailouts despite his.
Okay, well, I mean, I was just thinking about the reckoning. We know that the bailouts, in my mind, they had to happen.
No, I would like to see any company. I would hope that any company would be able to reorganize to maybe maybe use the bankruptcy protection to reorganize, and that's what we have in the current system. So I'm not unhappy that I would not
what I'm trying to get
unhappy. Yeah, I didn't have any disdain for them.
Okay.
In particular, over just if they're capitalism is a profit and loss system. There's a thing called creative destruction. So if you make a successful product in the 1940s, you don't get to just, under normal situation, you don't get to just rest on your laurels. You have to continually get with the times and the market. And because of this unique situation that the American car companies had in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they didn't have as many incentives to think long term, or it appeared that the long term horizon would be would always be sunny. I mean, I remember my parents saying, but
okay, were you ever?
It was just unthinkable that something would happen to GM.
Were you ever concerned in 2008 that the car industry was going to collapse?
No, because if General Motors went bankrupt, people still need cars, and more profitable car companies would come along, and we already have them. We have the Japanese cars, we have Korean cars, we have cars from all over the world.
Did American cars get better because of 2008?
I think they were getting better before that, actually.
Okay.
The pressure was on them long before 2008, but I think they're fine cars now. I think it's really hard to find a bad car now. The quality of cars has vastly improved.
So really, 2008 was just a reckoning, right? Cars are on the upswing, but they still had to have a reckoning as far as the financials of the car industry.
Well, and the housing industry, and this is really important. This is an important point. So, one of the things that attracted me to Austrian economics, which we really didn't talk about too much, was the business cycle.
All right.
What happens? What we're used to is we have all these great times, and then We have these periods where, all of our decisions seem to be great. Buy this house and it grows by 20% in value in a
We're
year.
in the black and we're going up.
Yeah, and we're and you can't go wrong if you buy a house because they're not making any more land, and you have all these things that are going on in the economy that are giving you this false illusion of future demand, such as low interest rates
And
and
also, like with the
manipulating
housing,
money.
we had fraud. We had a great amount of fraud with our housing bubble.
Yeah, but much of which would have been far less sustainable. They just it could not have occurred on the scale that it did. So yes,
Right.
there are other factors, but anyway, but the point is, and I may have mentioned this earlier, but in an economy, it's perfectly normal for one industry to fall and another industry to rise. And I think I did say this about the horse and buggies, the carriages versus General Motors, or when people stop buying flats, TVs with picture tubes, then
Yeah, they go to LCD.
But when everything, this is what the Austrian insight, when everything falls at once, when economic forecasting no longer works, when all the car companies at once are going bankrupt, when everything, the real estate and everything is hitting the skids, that's when you've had some serious external manipulation in the market, and the chief culprit of that is money and credit. Yeah.
Money and credit. Okay.
Yeah. So people say, yes, the people say that there's a free market. Well, one of the two main pillars of a free market is a free market in money and credit, and we don't have that. We have state-controlled money and credit.
Yes.
We have since 1971. Prior to 1971, money was linked to gold, and the dollars that you carried around, and this actually is prior to 1933 specifically. If you as an individual, if you had, I think it's $35, you could go and redeem that for an ounce of gold, and because the state or the government had to redeem that money, that kept them from overprinting to some degree.
Okay. Well, looking at 2008, I mean, we can talk about the philosophy, but just talking about 2008, I mean, you saw that reckoning as a positive or a negative, or just, in the business cycle, just because I want to dovetail this back into the cars that we have today as far as the styling. 2008 was just ancillary to the direction we were going in. Cars were being better, and they just need to straighten out the financials.
I think I can. Well, I think the best way to answer that is not to just talk about the car companies, but to say that when there's an artificial boom, most of the dysfunction is occurring. That's when people are overproducing, largely because of the false signals they're getting in the economy for future demand. So you have artificially low interest rates that are creating the illusion of future demand, because interest rates in a free market are actually tied to savings. So the more money that there is to lend out, the lower the rates will be, and vice versa if there's.
Well, I'll give you the mechanics here, but
let me just So in a sense, the downturn is a day of reckoning. It's called a correction, and that's a very good term because.
Well, we have a better word. It was being called too big to fail, Jeff.
Right. Okay, but the basic thing is it's a correction because that's when all the repair is supposed to work, and that's when General Motors should liquidate, they should try to reorganize, or they should go out of business. None of this stuff is, this is tragic individually for certain people, and even for certain regions that are heavily invested. That's not, but there's nothing economically wrong. This is creative destruction, and if that company was no longer serving the needs of its customers, then it should go out of business, and it's not catastrophic. Other people invest in it. It's bad for some people, but it's better for other people. So that's what should happen. The recession and the current boom bust economy, that's when the repairs are supposed to happen. Now this recession has just gone on and on and on. And in a sense, it's like the Great Depression, which went on for
Yes.
16 years. There were economic crashes before the Great Depression. The 1920 Depression was actually very similar in scope to the Great Depression,
29.
but to 29. Um, but the 21 Depression, most people have never even heard of, and
Right.
it actually was pretty bad. It was terrible because the U.S. had inflated all during World War One, and it was a huge misallocation of resources.
And it was also a
It fell
global.
badly, but it was the last depression that wasn't managed. So
Right.
what happened was the necessary liquidation occurred. Wages were not as rigid as they are. They were allowed to fall, which is not such a terrible thing when prices are also falling.
Okay, Jeff. Okay,
So,
well,
so,
just
so
bring
I'm
it up
just
in our time.
saying, I don't. I mean, if we're talking Freud and all that, you got yours. I didn't feel that way. My resentment came more out of the bailouts themselves.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's talk about too big to fail, please. I mean,
Mhm.
how hollow do you think it is, or do you think it's, absolutely, applicable? I mean, these companies were just too big to fail. We have to get in there and prop them up.
Well, they had failed.
Yeah, they had
And
failed.
they,
That's
they
a good
should they
point.
shouldn't right they should have either been allowed to reorganize, but no, this is too big to fail is nonsense.
Is that a slogan?
Well, yeah, it's basically corporate welfare. That's really all it is.
All right.
When you're now what happens is you have and this is an old uh, meme in economics. You have what is seen and what is not seen. So obviously, yeah, you see all the GM workers who didn't lose their jobs, and you see all the cars that they made and all that. But in economic wisdom, you have to so-called see the unseen as well. So when you're shifting resources from you're basically shifting resources from more productive output to less productive. So these companies were dysfunctional and not running properly, and they should have those resources should not have been squandered by those companies. Companies that would have come about and would have started and been more efficient. This would have been a better situation for the economy at large. Would be to let those resources, if GM wasn't using them efficiently, sell them off and let those who would use them efficiently do so. But none of that was allowed to happen, and too big to fail. When I was a kid, there was IBM was like
Right.
one of the dominant companies, and they made some really bad
Yeah.
decisions. They said who in the world would ever want to have a home computer, and other people came along and showed them who, and IBM just withered away. That didn't destroy the economy, and
All right. Well, okay, Jeff. What they're going to say is that libertarianism want to see things fail, so they can.
who's
Well, I
they?
mean, how do you answer that? Well, I mean, libertarians want a decentralized government. When they see too big to fail, they want the company to fail so it can be broken up and dispersed into more efficient units. I mean, just that thinking behind libertarianism. Is that a decentralization of you know,
Well,
the entity?
I don't want to see you fail personally, but
Well, like too
I
big to
don't want to
fail. In
force
my
other
case, my
people
arms
to.
would go off on their own.
So if you had a destructive, and I'm not saying you do, but if you were a gambler and all of this, and you had creditors coming after you,
Right.
I wouldn't want to see you fail or wish you any ill will, but I wouldn't want other people to be subsidizing your bad behavior. I would want you to
Okay.
economize and try to restructure your life, but I would never ask other people. I would say, Bunto, he's too big to fail. He's like 6'2", I think.
But I mean, the way that too big to fail was handled in 2008.
Yeah.
I mean, didn't it have practical effects? I mean, wasn't it handled correctly? Haven't we bounced back?
No, not really.
Not really.
We've had certain numbers have looked good, but the employment numbers are terrible still.
All right.
People have given up on looking. But what happens is what they've done is more of what caused the original collapse. So they've been printing more
More
money.
phony numbers.
It makes for phony numbers because you're printing money. They have printed an unbelievable amount of money, and I say printed, they don't literally print it, But all of these quantitative easing,
QE2, yeah.
yeah, that would be just like you getting another, you're in debt and all this stuff, and your credit card company says, well, we're just going to give you another $50,000 more of a credit limit. Well, your lifestyle will turn around because you can now charge again.
Right.
But you're leading to
a reckoning.
It's a fair. You can call it a reckoning, sure. But you're leading to a personal correction, unless somebody bails you out and decides you're too big to fail. So
all right.
So when you do these things, you come up with all these excuses to bail people out. Usually politically connected people. You'll notice that people who had mortgages, they didn't get bailed out. The
right.
mortgage holders got bailed out. So, and we know that's because the mortgage companies, the big financial,
well, political.
They're all in the political system. Rob
right.
Rubin, it's like a revolving door.
Countrywide, yeah.
And they go in and out, and they get lobbyists and all of that, and that's what they do.
Okay, well, I'm trying to say, okay, we're taking a look at the car industry. We see the financials were whack, and now I guess, one way or another, we're going in a direction for the financials of the car industry. Let's just talk about stylings and the appeal of our cars today. I mean, are our cars, are they beautiful, are they efficient, or are they both, Jeff? Today's cars.
I thought for a long time in the 80s when they were downsizing the cars, I thought they were that first of all they were still badly built.
Yes.
Mainly the American cars, unfortunately, they were the fit and the finish was horrible. I was in the business at the time. We often didn't know if a car was going to start when it came off the truck. I mean, it was that bad in some cases. I would say the real low point was late 70s. But and then I thought the 80s and 90s were pretty much a low point. I don't think the styling really caught on, but I think in recent times and maybe in the last 10 years, to my eye, I think car styling has.
Okay, we're talking American cars, Jeff.
I think even all cars, but okay, certainly applies to American cars. I think you can see a Chrysler and they have the high belt line. You can spot them right away, and you can tell a Hyundai. They have a real nice styling. Cadillacs have a beautiful that edgy styling. I love it. It's a very masculine look, but these cars are all identical. I think many of them are just really works of art. And I think
okay. Did we catch up to foreign cars? I was going to say, Jeff, did we catch up in our thinking to the foreigners, to Germany and Japan?
Anyway, in some ways, here's I guess an example. Yes and no. So I was watching a YouTube critique of I can't remember what was it was the Hyundai Genesis, which is a beautiful car. And they had the comparable Cadillac, and I don't know if it was the STS or the CTS.
CTS, yeah, all right.
Might have been the CTS. Yeah. And they were comparing these two cars. They were of the same class and the same kind of options. And the Cadillac was actually slightly better in a couple of categories, but it was like $35,000 or $40,000 more expensive.
Okay.
So they're making extraordinary cars. Price-wise, I don't think they're really
competitive.
It's competitive with the rest of the world.
If you're looking for a bang for buck, you still got to look overseas.
Yeah, and I would buy the Genesis.
And so, I mean, are you looking at the union? Okay, just quickly go back to the economics. Are you looking at our unions? Is that the markup, or just part of the markup?
I think it's part of the story. I think there's probably still a lot of waste. A lot of waste. I'm not an accountant, but I think there's still a lot of dysfunction, and I think that's typical when you bail somebody out when they're not bearing the loss. You'll just find less efficiency and less incentives for people to.
Okay, well, how about I do this? In the general, is the American car manufacturers' ideas of how to make a car on the seeing eye to eye with foreigners, or better, or still a little behind? Just on the general.
Yeah. My impression is I think in terms of the skill level and all that, I think
of engineering.
Yeah, maybe not implementation, but yeah, I think by and large, a lot of the American cars are made by robots and stuff like that. So,
Yes.
but keep in mind, I am, like I said, I'm more of an expert on the 50s to the 70s. So I
I
have
mean,
not really, I have not really, uh, I don't really study the new cars in the same way. Not because it's not a valid thing to study. I just don't have the time. So
well, the reason I bring that up
yeah, I'm just
is because in the American car manufacturer, don't we have something called CAFE, corporate average fuel economy?
right.
I mean, doesn't that drive our, you know, isn't that the evolution of the American car right there? Fuel economy?
Well, that's been an imposition on American car companies, as far as I know, and it may have pertained actually to foreign cars sold in America. I think it did. Of course, they had a lot less trouble complying with it. Um, but that's been one of many onerous
Like if
regulations.
we took one of our cars back to the 50s, they say, what are you guys thinking?" Right?
Yeah,
I mean, look at their cars.
gas is only 30 cents a gallon. Yeah.
So I mean, okay, please elaborate.
Yeah, just as a side thing on the cafe, we've never really figured out whether cafe actually saves any gas because
All right.
it's a rule of thumb that when things become less expensive, you tend to want to use them more. So it may be that we're actually driving more because cars are much cheaper than they used to be. We all see people moving out into the suburbs and farther out, and all this urban sprawl. And part of that is cars are cheaper, and it's you can buy a little four-cylinder car that actually
True.
so you can actually it's more affordable to live farther out. And the downside of the smaller cars, another possible downside, I think a more practical downside is that they're not as safe too. So
All right. Why aren't they as safe?
it's just physics. If you're in an SUV, you've got a lot more shrapnel around you, a lot more metal, a lot more distance between you and whatever hits you.
Well, just let me ask you this, Jeff. Do you think people in the 50s would have understood the SUV? I
No,
mean, if we could have.
no, and actually the SUV is. Thank you for bringing that. That does tie into cafe because the reason we have SUVs. When I was a kid, I knew only a couple people whose parents drove Suburbans or and like a Chevy Blazer was like a four-wheel drive. That was
Right.
something. I mean, people who hunted or whatever may own those, but you didn't see.
Scouts.
Yeah. Now my mother and most of my friends' moms, we were middle class. They all had these big station wagons.
Yeah,
with
station
the
wagons.
wood grain paneling and the whole thing on them. And what happened to those? Actually, cafe happened to those because what happened to those were they said that all cars had to get a certain amount of miles per gallon, but they exempted trucks.
Yeah.
So guess what? All the station wagons turned into trucks, and that's why when you're in your car you can't see over the. There's always some big SUV next to you that you can't see over.
Yeah.
So thank Cafe for that.
But just talking about the theme and the style, would people in the 50s wonder if people have shrunk in the future, that we're just getting tinier? I mean, because cars to me are very, they're tightly now. Now they're like wound around a passenger and a driver. They're not like the cars in the 50s, which you could just, float into. When you open the car door, you just sort of floated into the car. You could get in on the passenger side and just float across, the bench seating to the driver's side. Now that's like an impossibility in a modern day car. You're like a pilot in the modern day car. You're not like a driver.
Yeah, I don't know. I think people prefer different size cars and should be able to buy whatever size cars they want.
Like a Ford Fairlane.
I definitely like the way cars fit. I don't like the wasted sheet metal, and I like that it's just a.
But in the 50s, Jeff, that was status, to have a fin, to have an incredibly long driver's side door. Do you remember how long those doors were? I mean, it would be obscene today to have a door that long.
I had a '69 Eldorado, and it was, and if you parked it on a hill, you had to be like Hercules to open. and it was about this thick. It had to be at one point. It was kind of V-shaped, but it was huge, and you really if I parked on a hill and I was with my wife or my girlfriend at the time, happens to be the same person, um, I I'd park on a hill and she'd just look at me and go, "Really?" I guess
Well,
you're coming to.
okay. Have we hit the Jetson era in cars?
No,
Car.
no. In fact, I just bought a book by Jeffrey Tucker. I haven't read it yet. It's a Jetsons World, and it explains why we don't have no. Those cars flew around. They were super cool.
I know we wanted to fly. We're getting there.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Now we're going to electrics and hybrids. What's your take on those? Are they just a fad, or is that here to stay? The direction we're going.
I think uh, I think there's been a lot of resources diverted to that. I'm not sure. Um, One of the problems with making new cars is I don't know if I don't know how much I can really comment on that. There have been some breakthroughs. I was generally against forcing the market in that direction, which
Forcing the market.
a lot of people were coming out with electric cars and batteries. Electricity is you don't just look at the car, but uh, additional electricity. It's not like that doesn't pollute, and car batteries are made of very nasty things. So
Well, is it
it
smarter
actually
technology?
does a lot of oh sure, it's new technology, and it's yeah yeah. I don't know that much about it. I can't go on at length, but unfortunately, when a market is sort of forced, I think the honest way is to say, well, what might we've had with those resources if that had not been done? Just like everybody wants to say, and I thought it was pretty cool too when we went to the moon. But my God, what else could think of all the things that could have been done with those resources?
Okay, well, let me bounce this off you, Jeff. Okay, you've heard of peak oil, right?
Mhm.
Have we hit peak engine efficiency, or are we still, you know, can do some improvements with efficiency?
Oh, I don't think we've hit peak much of anything, but and I don't think the price of oil actually reflects this theory of peak oil either.
Peak oil.
I think people who are stakeholders oil would be being priced off the map, and oil prices, by the way, even when they're high, they're not at historic highs most of the time. In the 1980s, when we were buying gas at 4 something a gallon, that was comparable to the 1980 prices
Okay.
when you adjust for inflation. If you look at any of the graphs of oil prices, they're pretty even. They go up and down, but it's usually because of some international incident or something like that. But no, I don't have any reason to believe that engineering has plateaued or human achievement in general.
Well, like the next car you're going to get still is going to be a gas guzzler. It's not going to be electric.
Me
I mean,
personally,
yeah, I mean,
yeah, I don't think um, I don't think I wouldn't. I've never really thought about buying a hybrid. I don't. It'll be a gas drinker. I don't know about
yeah.
that.
You
It'll
know,
be.
because with the electric car, you have to look around for a socket, and you got to charge it, and then when something goes south on an electric car, you're still kind of limited in your
And,
repair.
and I don't know. I don't drive that much. So which is really better? Somebody driving 100,000 a year with an electric car, or me driving 10,000 a year in a gas car? So uh,
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, Jeff. Jeff, this has been a wonderful interview. I
yes, it's
like to
been
open
great
it.
fun.
Thank you, Jeff. I like to open it up to any other participants been listening. I'm going to take a quick break here, and I'll be back in just a few minutes. Thank you, Jeff. It was a
Okay,
wonderful interview.
I'll hang out here as long as there's somebody to talk to.
Please do.
And if anybody is listening, I'm just going to turn off my camera for a little bit, and I'll be right back. Hey, Ace, this.
Hi, Jeff. I just saw this. So did this just start?
No, but it's going to be live. It was on for. It was just me.
Oh, this is right. This is your and Bunto's talk, right?
Yeah, yeah, it was fun.
Oh, cool, good. I'd rather be in here than the one with sock account. Even though I love sock account, just Shamos is in
This
there
is
right
this is
now.
live. Be careful.
Oh, oh, shut up, sir. Oh my god.
So anyway, no, we talked about. We pretty much talked beforehand about what we were going to talk about. So it was some stuff about atheism, the atheist movement, libertarianism, um, cars, a lot of stuff about cars. Um, Aestus, I didn't mean to scare you off. I just meant that
Okay,
when we're live, you don't want to necessarily say too much.
you're right. That's true. I just came in here, just barged in and started saying stuff.
No, he opened it up to everyone. So
Okay, cool,
yeah.
cool.
So
Great. Okay.
I think some people were watching, and if anybody has a comment, I'd be
Yeah.
glad to answer.
It looks like it's live right now, so.
It's still live. Yeah, he jumped off for a minute, and
Oh, okay.
he I think other people, if they want to join. I know we had at least one or two people watching. So
Hi, folks. How y'all doing? Welcome to the Hangout.
Hey, Bunto.
So, how cold is it where you guys are at? Here it is 32 degrees.
you don't even want to know. You don't even want to know how cold it is where Ace is.
No, it's actually been not all that bad. It's been around in the 50s.
Well, that's why I didn't want to know
Oh, you're good.
that.
Yeah. Oh, that's why. I see.
You can walk outside.
Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, we're going to be taking full advantage of the cold weather pretty soon and going up into the mountains for some skiing.
Oh, really? Oh,
Oh
that's a
yeah.
lot of fun.
Oh, it is. I love skiing.
I love California. You can drive to whatever weather you want. That's just,
Yeah, it's yeah, exactly. It's the one place in the world that you can ski, surf, and mountain bike all in one day.
yes. I think Seth did that one time just to prove it could
Oh,
be done.
yeah, yeah. I think you're saying about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay, my thoughts on the interview was I guess if they gave you some sort of incentive to buy an electric car, you would think that is manipulating the industry, Jeff. They gave you an incentive to buy an electric car. I mean, what the thing about the electric car is that they say it's better technology. See what I mean?
Well, if the manufacturers gave you an incentive, that they do stuff like that all the time. But if the
I
state
mean, the
was,
state, yeah, the government tax credit. What would you think of that? I mean, that's just manipulating the industry,
well, you put me in a terrible position because I do like it when people don't pay taxes.
right?
So, and I don't consider that a subsidy. So I'm kind of not against tax credits on that level. So the tax credit is really just taking less of somebody's money. So I never would want to. I would never want to interfere with that. But it is manipulative, and it does
Okay,
distort the
well,
market. And it's
I was going to say, okay, the simile, the analog is light bulbs. Remember, we all
Mhm.
had light bulbs, and now they moved us over to LED. And then remember, they stopped on the phase out twice, didn't they? They were going to like, well, we'll give you an extension so you can have the old light bulbs, sold at Walmart for a couple more months. So, I mean, is not electric cars the better technology that this whole country should be going towards, or is that just
not from what
manipulated?
I read, and I'm not an expert on this, but in terms of entire energy savings, you can you have to look at the big picture, not just the miles per gallon on the car, but what's the environmental impact of making them? What's the environmental impact of the extra energy that it takes to charge them? They don't run exclusively on electricity. There's all these other factors. I don't have this information in front of me, but I'm told that the cost of making a Prius, for example, is off the map in terms of its its environmental impact. But all that aside, the more of a free market that you have, we have a free market in energy and any number of things, and the more free those markets are, the more the markets send accurate signals to people as to what the costs of things are, and the more rationally resources are allocated. So nobody really can say whether cars should be run on electricity or any of that stuff, except for consumer preference. And when consumer preference drives those things, now we do have some cases where, unfortunately, power usage is heavily socialized. So there's an old saying, only the government has too many customers. Everybody else likes to have lots of customers.
All right.
Lots of people consuming their resources. But because governments, generally power companies, they have wage ceiling, they have local monopolies and things like that.
Well, this is what they'll
the
claim.
free flowing of prices. But basically, when something is in short supply, the price of it goes up, and that tends to take care of it. You shouldn't have shortages in a free market economy because the price system will regulate that. The price goes up, people change their behavior, they look for ways to economize, and all of that. So I'm really opposed to any kind of economic social engineering.
Oh, and along that line, actually, it's the internet actually has the same problem because sending a packet is completely free, and so you have the tragedy of the commons, excuse me, where people are sending way too many packets, way more packets than the network can rationally hold because the prices are set as a subscription, not by how much you are sending. So that's another problem where the prices are where the costs are socialized and you get this tragedy of commons.
Right, and there's unfortunately there's this big hue and cry over net neutrality, and people seem to be outraged that somebody would have to pay more for higher bandwidth and packets that you say, but there's no reason why Macy's shouldn't pay more rent than the Sunglasses Hut in a mall or something like that. That's you pay for what you use, and so I'm not against these fast lanes at all.
Let me go ahead and explain to you the electronic car concept. Excuse me. The reason that they want to goose the industry is because the gas guzzlers will never. They say, who killed the electronic car, right? Remember that movie? Who killed the electric car?
Yes.
They say that these things are wonderful devices, but the gas guzzlers won't let it, it will cut into them. See what I mean? It will defeat their ends, so they squash the electronic car. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, the car companies squash the electronic car?
No, the gas guzzlers, the people that are, the oil companies don't want to see the electric cars. Because
wouldn't somebody make a killing if they invented an electric car that everybody wants to buy? If this is so economically feasible and in demand, why would just the three? Why couldn't Google do it or somebody else?
Well, that's why they say that the reason that they have to goose the industry, the electric car industry, is because big oil doesn't want to see the beast on the road.
But people want to make money, so why wouldn't Google make an electric car if it's so easy, or why wouldn't they invest in their own car company?
They could threaten to make an electric car, but then the only reason they would do that would be because to get big oil interest, to maybe compensate them to not go in that direction. I'm just playing the conspiracy theory. That's what they say.
Yeah, I think that's pretty baseless. Honestly, I have not seen the movie, but I think that's pretty baseless economically. That it's not just the three car companies that are involved, or if the government's preventing other car companies from forming,
Tesla,
then if the government's actually doing something to prevent other car companies from forming, and then so they can subsidize the existing ones, that would be outrageous. But if it's economically feasible to make an electric car and there's demand for it, then we don't have to wait for the three three companies to make it. Somebody else. You should invest in it if you think it's viable.
What they say, okay, what really holds back the electric car in my mind, and you'll laugh, is horsepower, right? They just don't have enough guts.
No, I won't. I think that's part that, yeah, people don't want them. Many people don't want them.
Well, they fear the lack of power. That when they need the power, they won't get it from an electric car.
Right.
You have that same outlook that they're just not powerful enough?
Yeah, people used to say the same thing about 6 cylinders and 4 cylinders, and when they finally got better, now just about everybody almost nobody has a V8. When I was a kid, everybody wanted a V8. They didn't want those little dogs. But
so, I mean, do you like 4-cylinder car? You could be satisfied with a 4-cylinder?
I have a 6 now, but my next one will be a 4, I'm sure.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Just you want to go small at this point in your life, or?
Yeah, but I have one of the old Sonatas from the like a 2006. It's a nice car, but it's not. They call them mid-size now, but to me, it's like a little car. So yeah, like 20 years ago, I was buying American cars. I was actually selling them for a while. The 4-cylinder engines wouldn't get out of their own way, but they made them better, and now they're they're fine.
Jeff, how important is power in your mind for a car to have? I mean, do you absolutely detest underpowered cars? Remember the Vega, Capri?
Yes, I detest those. I had a Vega that we used to joke it would downshift if you went over a tar strip.
But I mean, are you a believer that car has to have a certain amount of power?
Yeah, and I don't know if I can quantify it, but I want the car to go when I push the pedal down.
Right.
I don't have a really heavy foot. It doesn't have to. I don't have to feel the G-force or anything, but I like to be able to pass somebody without wondering if the car is going to downshift or backshift or whatever while I'm doing it. So.
The Yugo, okay, the Yugo experience, that was just an exercise in futility?
Yeah, well, that's pretty much what a communist country car will look like. or remember the Trabant?
Trabant.
Yeah, the Soviet car.
Okay, well now we have just like the Ford Fusion. I mean, are those like cars that they just want to mass produce for the people that could barely afford a car? I mean, what's your take on those little cars?
I don't know that much about the Ford Fusion, but I think in general cars are made.
What's the smallest car Ford makes? Isn't it the Fusion? I mean, maybe it starts with a P, but there's like a really small vehicle that Ford makes, and I said they only make that for people that are just barely can afford a car.
Yeah, I'm way more familiar with classic cars than I am with the current lineup.
With the new lines.
Yeah, but just in general. Ford or anybody, they want to make money, and they constantly are surveying their customers, doing focus groups, and trying to figure out what people want, because Ford wants to make money, and they make money by predicting what the market will want, because it takes a while to tool and develop a car, so they have to continually try to keep up with demand. And when the government's involved and they're rigging that, they're really distorting things.
True. Have you ever heard the term rice burner?
Yeah.
It's a rice burner. Okay, so the idea behind a rice burner is that you can trick it out, right? That you buy one of these rice burners and then you just...
I'm sorry. I thought a rice burner was like a car.
It is a Ford car.
In Asia somewhere.
Yeah, but the whole idea of the rice
stereotype.
burner is that it's so tiny that you have to like upscale it yourself. I mean, does that appeal to you? Like ever getting a rice burner and then upscaling it, tricking it out?
No.
Putting your own suspension
me personally?
in? Yeah.
No. I go with stock. Always have. But I know people who, my preferences. I don't tend to universalize my preferences. I haven't seen a lot of really tricked out foreign cars though. That just doesn't. Maybe BMWs and stuff like that.
Well, I know if I bought if I could just hit the lotto and I could buy a Cadillac CTS, I know I'd put in all the customized suspensions. Make sure it was a stick. I mean, does that appeal to you? Like, tricking out a car if you bought one. If you could have the money to go buy it, you just
No,
want to
I'm
buy
the wrong.
something stock.
No, I'm the wrong person to ask about that too, because my grandfather was a stylist, as I mentioned. So I like them the way my grandfather designed them.
You wouldn't customize them.
Now, the only car I did have a Vega, and it was such an awful car. I did want to actually drop a V8 in that, but I never did. But I used to have that desire for that car. But most all the cars that I ever bought or liked, I liked them exactly the way they were made, with the options that I wanted. I didn't want aftermarket stuff on my car, generally.
Yeah, get aftermarket, mess with the torque,
Yeah.
Upscale the engine.
Yeah, no, I would just find a car that I liked the way it drove, and I would leave it alone.
But that was the idea with the muscle car, wasn't it? That you get a muscle car and then you just,
Yeah, see, if I had a
ramp it up.
GTO, I would want it exactly off the. And I'm not saying that's better or worse. I'm just saying that my personal preference is I want it to be exactly stock.
Even the tires, Jeff.
Absolutely.
Stock. Wow.
Tires, wheels.
So you're
I'm a purist.
definitely
Yes,
purist.
I am a purist on my classical cars. Yeah, or really any cars. I would have no desire if I. To me, cars are more of a utility now than they used to be. If I bought a classic car, no, I would take all that crap off a classic car. I would. I mean, I'm sorry to call it crap, but I would. Yeah, it would look like it came off the assembly line.
Wow. So how long have you been into classic cars? Just forever?
I can't remember. When I was a little kid, my dad told me that I could tell a Chevy Impala from a Caprice when I could barely chew gum. Yeah, I don't even remember. I was. My grandfather used to give me these promo models.
Right.
When I was a little kid, and there's pictures of me playing with those from an era that I don't even. When I was like 1 or 2 years old, and I was always just mesmerized by cars.
So you got classic cars down, but the new stuff is not as attractive.
Well, I think I told you I like the new stuff, but I'm not as
like what's the new Kia
that...
called? They have a new Kia now. I've been seeing them. The Kia Soul. Have you seen that? The new idea.
Is it SO? No, I haven't.
SOUL. Well, okay, like what?
So like Seoul, Korea, but spelled like Seoul.
Yeah, Korea Soul. Yeah, but I mean, they're trying to sex up the box. The SUV is starting to get a little played out, so they're trying to sex it up.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed that about SUVs? We got the mini SUV going on, so now they're really trying to sex it up for people.
Well, just to clarify, I don't know the cars as well today, and cars are more of a utility to me. But I think cars are better.
Right.
Than they were in the era that I liked. The era that I like and know a lot about. It's because it was the era of my childhood. There's a lot of nostalgia attached to it. There's, I know a lot about that period of history. It was a turning point for the car industry in a lot of ways. So I'm just, it's like if you're an expert on the Roman Empire, it doesn't mean that the Civil War is any less interesting. It's just I can't be an expert on everything or knowledgeable about everything. So,
have you seen the Scion? It's like a square.
I've seen them, but they haven't jumped off the road.
What's your take on that? On that look? On that?
I'd have to actually Google these things.
Taxi cab type car.
Are you talking about those really boxy? Yeah.
Square. Yeah, they're just boxes.
Yeah, that's not my cup of tea. I like the combination of the aerodynamic and the
something that people won't laugh at, right, Jeff? When you drive by.
Yeah, I don't like that PT Cruiser, something that looks like a.
Oh yes. So what did you think of the PT? Was that too retro for you? Was it too phony, or what?
Well, when I go to rent a car, I always say I'll take anything you got except for a PT Cruiser. And I didn't like the. Yeah, I thought they were. I didn't like that.
They like the retro.
I like some of the real I mean, that's a cartoonish. That's a caricature. But I like the. I do like the retro Challenger.
Yeah.
The retro Mustang I think is beautiful. I like the some people didn't like it, but I kind of like the retro Tornado. And I like the Camaro, although I don't think it looks that retro to me. But apparently, it's supposed to look like this early '70s. But I would never make that connection. But
Now, the VW, remember, now they want to come back to the old Bug.
yeah, they
Remember?
have.
Yeah, they have.
That's fine.
Hi, Lindsay.
It's not my cup of tea, but
Oh, yeah, definitely. Lindsay, how are you tonight?
I am one moody bitch tonight.
You're freezing.
No, I'm moody.
Oh, you're moody. What happened?
That's stuff. Jeff, it's so nice to see you.
it's lovely to see you too.
I like your beard you're growing out.
Thank you.
Are you growing out a beard, or is that just laziness?
I'm gonna let this grow out. I think. Not
cool.
not like Duck Dynasty or anything. Just hopefully it'll be a little bit darker in a week. Although there's a lot of gray around here, so.
ZZ Top.
Yeah.
It adds character.
Well, thank you.
You need it, Jeff.
Did I sound smarter tonight or look smarter?
I don't know. I wasn't here for the majority of it.
Yes.
I just caught the beginning and the end.
Well, cool.
The beginning was who he was, and the end was cars.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, somebody will pop in who saw the whole interview, Jeff, and they'll tell you what was controversial, what they had issues with. Obviously, it was probably your take on cars. That's probably the most objectionable thing you said all night.
Probably that V8 comment or whatever.
Or probably the too big to fail was the slogan.
Yeah.
Okay, these industries crash, and you say that's a good thing.
Well, I don't say it's a good thing in the sense that for the people involved, it's a tragedy. We had a family business that failed, and it wasn't a good thing for us. But the whole world doesn't revolve around us. If my business had been artificially propped up, or somebody else had been forced to pay for my business, that would not have been good for them. So, in a sense, our business was not successful. Resources were not being used efficiently in our business, and others were able to use those resources better. So we sold the business, not for very much money, and somebody took those resources and made better use of them, and they prospered and profited as well they should have.
Okay. What right now do you see is a very poorly run industry? Energy's poorly run, or
well, you always have to ask this.
The mortgage business.
Yeah, I would say this just in general. It's a good rule of thumb that whatever business is the most controlled or run by government, generally they're the least efficient economically. So like Amtrak, for example. Yeah, those I think that's enough said about that. I think those are really.
Do you think we're going back into the bubble thinking? We're going to have another housing bubble?
I think that's what they're trying to do. Rates are not being allowed to go up to their natural state. They should be much higher. There's not any savings to support it. There's not future demand, and yet with rates being held down as they have been, and I guess they've been allowed to go up a little bit, but it's still dysfunctional to have this kind of intervention, and it's kicking the can. Politicians have a low time preference. They really they want things to be fine during their terms and when they're in power, and they're much less interested in.
Do you blame
in
the politicians, or do you believe the corporations that are sitting on the money?
Well, if the politicians weren't for sale,
okay.
There's blame to go around. But if the politicians weren't for sale, then
Okay, well,
it couldn't be as nearly as bad a problem as it is.
How would you grade Obama's tenure? Just economically.
Oh well, pretty horribly.
Horribly, despite being given 2008, you're going to give him a bad grade.
Yeah, I mean, what has he done to turn it around, really?
Well, 2008 could have really been bad. I mean, it could have been.
2008 was bad.
It was bad, but was the Depression bad? Are you saying it's the equivalent of the Great Depression?
There wasn't as much money printing in the Great Depression, so in many ways, the numbers wise, it's pretty comparable to the '29 crash, and the fact that this correction has lasted so long, that's he and his administration. I don't know how much he personally. They're very much responsible for it. This liquidation should have been allowed to happen. Nobody should have been too big to fail. Resources should have been put to better use. Should have been a lot of deregulation, a lot of repealing of onerous laws. We shouldn't have Sarbanes-Oxley. We shouldn't have these all of these barriers that make it harder to start businesses in the U.S.
So you give him a failing mark for the way he handled the economy from 2008.
Yeah, and the wars too. I mean, he's escalated in Afghanistan. He dragged his feet on getting out of Iraq and actually wanted to stay, but he was only.
Okay, let's put this against the Bush years. You think the Bush knew what he was doing economically?
Well, when you say knew what he was doing, we're assuming he had the same motivations. Knew what he was doing. I don't know that he was.
Did he not give us 2008? Did not George Bush give us 2008?
Yes, he played a large part in. Alan Greenspan is probably the most instrumental, but no, Bush was horrible for the economy. He was horrible for world peace. I would put him and Obama in roughly the same. I would rank them in roughly the same place in terms of their greatness or lack thereof.
Okay, so we'll keep going back. Who are you going to go to? Bill Clinton? The last guy who knew what he was doing about the economy?
Believe it or not, the last president who actually shrunk the size of government was Warren Harding.
No, he wasn't a stellar example of somebody who knew what he was doing of the economy.
Well,
they rode him out of town on a rail.
Well, he actually died, but there was some scandal in.
I'm sorry. Who was the guy in the Great Depression? The one just before Roosevelt?
Hoover. No, Hoover was.
Yes, that's right. I'm sorry.
Hoover was not a laissez-faire capitalist at all. He was a progressive, even though he was a Republican. He was a progressive, and most of the New Deal actually began under Hoover.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. He started the National Recovery Act, and even the Roosevelt regime pretty much grudgingly credited quote unquote Hoover with having started the New Deal. Yeah.
Okay, so we're never going to go in that direction ever again. As far as reducing the amount of government. I mean, the next president we're going to have is either going to be Rand Paul, right, or Hillary Clinton.
I don't know.
Who do you think is going to be the next? Or Jeb Bush?
I guess that's the way it looks at the moment.
I highly doubt it'll be Rand.
Yeah.
Or Jeb Bush, right?
Right. Well,
that seems more likely to me, but who knows? It's a long time. Yeah. When they have Iowa, it's like, oh, so and so won. They're going to be the.
Iowa, has no statistical correlation with the win whatsoever.
Well, Bachman won it last time.
Yeah. Right.
Alrighty.
But anyway, you don't know for sure, but I think yes, the government will be smaller. Unfortunately, it won't be because of political activity. It's just not mathematically possible to
sustainable.
It's empires usually last 200-300 years.
Okay, we fall into the military-industrial complex. Won't you agree? The one that Eisenhower warned us about.
Oh, definitely. The one he created and then warned us about.
So you're gonna go ahead and blame him, but.
Well, he did. He started the CIA, the covert wars.
Well, I'll go all the way to.
But it was nice of
too.
him to to warn us against it after he started it. I'll give him credit for that.
Okay, but the thing is that you have to cut military off at their knees. I mean, nobody's going to do that. I mean, they
Yeah,
build. Remember how they
it's-
build,
yeah.
expensive billion-dollar ships, and then the next day,
and
they destroy them
right.
because they just have so much wastage in the military.
Agreed. Yeah, I know it's really hard. I mean, it's this. See, there's a problem economists talk about a lot called concentrated benefits and diffuse losses. So, in the big scheme of things, like the military may cost you a relatively small amount of your paycheck, but to McDonnell Douglas or any of these Beltway bandits, they make huge sums of money. So they're going to have the lawyers, the lobbyists, and all this. So yeah, it's a huge problem.
Okay, does America need a base in every country?
No, and what would we do if somebody else had a base?
I know, a base.
In 170 countries, at least one. They have thousands of bases, but yeah, I think they're in. I think the U.S. has like bases in 170 countries.
So you go to the Google Hangout and you say, okay, we need to de-escalate, to de-arm. I mean, how far are you going to get with that in the Google Hangout?
Gee, I don't know. It depends on the Hangout. If I'm with Aestus here, I'd probably.
You go in the Nadia Hangout and everybody's talking God, and the first thing you say is, hey, God needs to disarm. We need to de-escalate.
That might be something Nadia would agree with. I don't know. I've never talked to her about that in particular. We mostly, unfortunately.
Yeah, I haven't talked to her about it either. I don't know. I don't think she would. I think I get the sense that she's at least what's the word I'm looking for? She tolerates guns. I don't think she's anti-gun, but I could be completely wrong though.
I was in a hangout a couple days ago where most everybody seemed to agree that the U.S. should withdraw from the interventionist role that is played, and that it's a contributing factor to most of the seemingly intransigent problems we have over there. But I find people who will very strenuously make other arguments.
So do you ever look at our military as a death cult? You remember how the Aztecs used to do?
That's a loaded question.
The Aztecs used to march a guy up, every day, and sacrifice him just to make sure the sun, rises and sets. And in our death cult in the military, we have people, we have soldiers that are killed, that they're all heroes. Every soldier that dies over there is a hero. That's their incentive for the death cult is that they are making freedom for.
Yeah, I think the politicians and the people who order them to do that are probably more of the actual death cult, perhaps. I mean, there was some guy on TV, extolling the virtues of apologizing for everything the police have done,
right?
No matter how horrendous it is, and yeah, we're supposed to worship the military no matter what they're involved in. And,
law enforcement. Yeah. They're all fighting to save our lives.
Yeah, and honestly, these are not the most dangerous jobs in America. If you look at I'm not sure about the military, but like if you look at police and fire, the guy who picks up your garbage actually is doing a much more dangerous job. People who die. I mean, there's trash crushers and people die in those kinds of accidents all the time. Or these ice fishers jobs, truck drivers, traveling salesmen. These are all higher mortality.
Like if you did the cost-benefit analysis of our military situation, the obvious answer is to disarm. Let's start shrinking this monstrosity. Would you agree?
Yeah. Well, we spend like what is it, 28 times.
Now, if you remember Obama's sequester, he even put Social Security on the table. Besides going to have a military cuts. Remember that one? I mean, that's like somebody pointing at black and saying it's white, in my mind. Just a Democratic president who's going to say, oh, yeah, we're not going to cut the military, but we're going to put Social Security on the table.
Right.
And go ahead and cut old people's pensions. I mean, Is that what sad shape we are now in this country?
Well, it is. Yeah, it's almost like they used to have this thing called the Washington Monument ploy, and it's from a. I think this happened in the late '60s when the Park Service was facing a possible budget cut, and rather than cut a few bureaucrats, they decided to close the Washington Monument tour so that it would immediately hurt the taxpayers. The people would hurt the population more than letting a few bureaucrats go. They want to they want to threaten you and and they're never talking about a cut in the sense like in your own budget. Like if you were to cut your spending of something, you would actually use a minus sign. What they're talking about is cutting the rate of growth of something.
So they don't want to even have a reduction from the current spending levels.
So, but they they want to cut the. So if you were saying like if you were consuming 5,000 calories a day and you were going to drop down to 3,000 calories, that would be a cut.
Right.
But that's how they calculate it. A cut is not a literal cut in the amount of the overall size, and that's why the last one to have done it was Harding.
Okay, so Jeff, is there any morality to cutting expenditures, government expenditures? I mean, you can say no, but then I say, well, we're going to close all the old folks' homes. I mean, am I stepping in morality grounds there, or are we just talking, you cannot have any morality when you start cutting government?
Well, it's not moral to take money from one person and give it to another, and to the extent that old folks' homes are on the receiving ends of other people's money, then it's immoral for them to have that money to begin with if you want to talk strictly in terms of money. So no, and it's not, and the parties involved didn't consent to that. So I didn't consent to it to begin with, but...
Okay, so let's talk Medicare Plan D, okay? The one that Bush did, remember the big Medicare Plan D? Okay, to you that was... I wouldn't say it had no value moral, to give all those benefits to people who couldn't afford medicine. Medicare Part D. He gave a big disc. It was like a big gift to pharma. Say, like you could give all these subsidies for medications.
I don't actually think it really helped most people either, from what I heard. But
yeah,
the libertarian principle is, and this is both an economic principle, but if you want to help people out, you can voluntarily give them charity and stuff like that. And the U.S. is actually, even with all the taxes, is still one of the most charitable countries in the world.
Security failed. Now we need Medicare. Oh, Medicare failed. Now we need Medicaid. Oh, Medicaid failed. Now we need Plan D.
But the economics of it aren't even sound, because when you flood the market, that's what drives the demand up and the prices up and creates the problem that we're now supposed to call upon government to solve. So it's like whack-a-mole. But no, now, like Ron Paul was saying, he doesn't believe in any of the social programs, but he wouldn't make those the first ones he would go after. He would go after the militarism and the worst ones. So you can probably make an argument that it shouldn't be the first thing you go after, maybe, but overall, no, it's not.
Well, like, how idiotic is somebody like Governor Perry? I mean, who just wants to just cut. What would you say? Like, arbitrarily just start cutting government programs. To me, in my mind, remember when he said that thing? What are the 3 government programs he cut, and he couldn't even name them?
I think he's idiotic, but that sounds pretty unidiotic to me.
But no, he would just arbitrarily cut government, expenditures. Anything but the military. I bet if the announcer would have said what military programs.
Government's way too big. I mean, how do you non-arbitrarily cut it? Should you just pull the plug out on all of it? Maybe.
Well, I mean, first thing, anything that has to do with our health, the healthcare system of our government, I don't think you should, just arbitrarily start cutting things. Because that's what happened in Texas. He closed all the state mental homes, so we have crazy people now in houses that are in public places. Go ahead, Aces.
So probably one of the most sensible plans that I've heard of is opting out. So people like my age, I'm 20, should be able to opt out of things like Social Security and all these things. And to forego the quote unquote benefits of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And so to slowly phase things out like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And then
okay, go ahead, Jeff.
yeah, and even if you didn't phase them out, we'll just say if you don't want to participate in this, you don't have to pay into it. You won't get anything.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
yeah, this is how we could solve the money problem. We say, well, we don't care. You can keep the dollar, but we'll just allow competing currency.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
guess,
Exactly.
you know, we all know what's going to happen, but that's definitely a peaceful and a quick way of.
Well, just out of curiosity, Asus, are you a libertarian?
Yeah, I'm what's called a lowercase L. Like, I'm not part of the party. I'm very eclectic with my ideas. I tend to, I mean, I most of the time agree with what Jeff has to say, but we also have kind of our that's with all libertarians. They always have kind of their own different
Oh,
views.
come
But
on,
yeah,
you're a
mostly
libertarian.
yes. I am. Yeah, mostly yes. I am.
He wants
yes.
to be liked.
Yeah,
He's a libertarian who wants people to like him.
What I like to do is I like to find as much overlap with my ideas with other people as possible, and then to start from there, right? So if you don't like the military, neither do I, right? That kind of stuff.
We all know that you're thoughtful and non-dogmatic, but your views are libertarian.
Oh, absolutely. I can't claim to be unbiased. That's for sure.
Have you ever come into conflict with people in Google Hangouts with your libertarian views, Asus?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Any examples come to mind?
Nadia's one.
Oh, seriously? What happened?
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't. I mean, I don't want to talk about it.
It's kind of on a live it's on a live hangout.
Yeah.
It's kind of bad form.
It was that painful, right? That painful.
Not that it was painful. It was so run-of-the-mill and uninteresting.
Oh, it had no depth.
And yes, a little painful. I'll admit that. Yes.
It had no depth to it in the Nadia hangout.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, with like I said, I just want to get off the topic right now. we can talk about it offline if you want. I don't want to.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, Nadia has all sorts of conversations going on there, and anything that is besides religion, I'd love to hear offered. Yeah. Okay, well, let's go to religion. Just show you how hypocritical I am. The religious portion of the interview. Jeff, I mean, did it ever bother you the soundness of the religious argument that another person brings forward to you? I mean, do you ever get bugged by it, or you just, accept that that person's on that level and, maybe needs to sharpen their argument? Just speaking religiously, theistic, like, I know God is real because he talked to me last night, and you maybe offer that that's not a very good convincing proof.
Well, usually what I say, and I'm sincere when I say it, is, I know you, and I've had experience with you, and I fully believe that you had that experience. Because I think you're an honest person, and I can appreciate that it meant something to you, and it was profound. You have not, however, given me enough to draw the same conclusion that you've drawn about what actually did happen. To me, there are many other natural explanations for your having had that experience. Sometimes it's well, I was really thinking about this person, and I was, in despair or whatever, and all of a sudden the person called me, and so like that would be an example, and I would say, I appreciate that happened. I'm glad it happened to you. I'm glad it helped you out, but I can't really. I mean, what about that led you to believe that you actually had interacted with something external to you?
Supernatural, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so you just asked them, and I said, no disrespect, but while I do appreciate that happened to you, I would not draw the same conclusion as you did about it without any actual evidence.
True. All right. Well, let's go to the other end of the spectrum where they're like giving you the ins and outs, the fine ins and outs of the Kalam argument. And I mean, do you find those sorts of philosophical extrapolations convincing?
Yeah, there's different versions of it, and I had really never encountered them until I got on here. But I find that most of them equivocate to my ear on the definition of the universe.
Okay.
So it kind of first of all, it's special pleading because you're saying all things must have a beginning, therefore
Right.
God, and then of course, well, where's the beginning of God? Don't we need a super God and a super
True.
super God?
Yeah,
So there's that problem, and then and it doesn't. It certainly doesn't get you to the Christian God one way or the other. You just, but it actually presents the regression problem as a problem, and then answers it with another regression.
And the other thing that the Kalam cosmological argument assumes is that the past is finite, past temporal, right? That there is that the Big Bang model of cosmology is true instead of, say, something like the Big Bounce, which has an infinite past. And a lot of obviously the Big Bounce theory isn't as popular, but there's been a lot of development in that area of cosmology, and there's still some models that use the Big Bounce that perfectly describe the data. So it hasn't been yet taken off the table, right? So if say so the Coulomb cosmological argument obviously requires the universe to be a Big Bang universe rather than a Big Bounce universe.
Interesting.
So that's another problem.
Very good offering. Well, this is what came to my mind, guys. Okay, so you're just jumped into the Nadia hangout, and these guys are talking highbrow philosophical determinism. I mean, you jump right in, or you just sort of just lay back and say, what's the point?
Well, I don't want to pick on Nadia again, but
well, it's not picking. It's
just in general. If we could just say that kind of hangout,
right?
I'm usually I'm usually the one that's making the argument for against determinism, although it is somewhat of a nuanced argument. So I usually get drawn into that rather quickly.
Yeah, I think me and Jeff.
I don't consider myself a compatibilist.
Oh, you're not? Oh, okay.
No.
But yeah, I used to be drawn in right into it, but I've realized that a lot of times these days it's better to just stay out of it, and because there's always stuff you could be doing other than hanging out on Google. So.
Well, you like.
I'll get into it. I don't have any problems.
No, I will too. I definitely will too. But I've realized that I don't jump in with as much vigor anymore. I'm hearing the same things over.
Well,
and over
it is something that has been gotten a lot of play, and it does get tiresome. We have talked about it a lot, but there's still I don't know. It's better than talking about sports or weather.
You ever feel like a Nadia hangout could be a little simpler, or do you just like them for what they are? There's expressions.
Yeah, I don't really want to comment on that. I don't want to. I'll tell you.
Or you just shop around for another hangout.
Yeah, but that goes for any. Like if it's a group and they're talking about something, I just go to another hangout, and if I don't like it, but I don't really want to. Nadia does a lot of hangouts, and I like her personally, and I just don't want to, particularly in a live setting. I mean, I've just been to some really bad hangouts before, but they haven't necessarily been hers.
Well, they are what they are.
Yeah. She's a very gracious moderator.
Okay.
She welcomes everybody who joins. And
I would say the exact opposite, but okay.
She's not a gracious debater, I'll grant you that.
No, even a moderator. I was in one of her hangouts recently, and I was making points, and she was slowly turning my volume down until nobody could hear me.
Oh, I haven't experienced that. Okay.
Yeah.
I generally I don't like these hangouts where everybody's talking about.
Yeah, exactly. We need to stop.
The G-Man, or I was on with the G-Man and I said this and I said that. That's really the. I would rather. That's when I start. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, the bottom of the barrel stuff.
Yeah, the rivalries and stuff like that, and my hangout's better than your hangout. I just don't. I don't like that stuff.
Well, I mean, did you challenge her on that, Astis? Why are you turning my mic down?
I know. I just left. I
just left.
It's a waste of time at that point. I mean, to be honest, I usually avoid her hangouts because I just don't like her personally.
Yeah.
me, I guess we just don't get along all that well. And the other thing is she loves to correct me, without actually saying how I'm wrong, or So like we talked about a couple of things, and she said no, it's just, that's not the definition, and then goes off on this massive diatribe.
I say yes, an extrapolation.
Yeah, which had nothing to do with the original point that I was making. She was just nitpicking with my definition, because some of the things it's very complex, and I'm not going to give a full definition because that's just being bogged down in the details. And it's just between me and her pretty much. I don't think that it's so uninteresting. I mean, it's
Yes,
it's
it has that factor.
people having egos and them saying, "Oh, I have control over people because I'm the moderator of the room, so I can, I am God in this room." It gets to people's heads, and it's so uninteresting.
Good. Well, what comes to mind is this: do you guys have zero, or you have a pretty good tolerance for any vulgarities? Like if it's a really vulgar hangout. I mean, are you bothered by that, or you just take it as it just happens that way?
Yeah, I'm not particularly bothered.
No,
I
I'm
don't
not.
want to speak for Jeff.
I don't know. I can't think of any time I've been really.
I'll sometimes throw in a joke or two, a vulgar
Yeah,
joke or two.
levity.
Yeah. If everybody's having fun and I find it funny, then
Yeah, I've been on hangouts where they weren't live hangouts, but everybody was kind of let their hair down and telling jokes and stuff like that. I think
Well, I mean, if it was a live hangout, would you admonish them, Jeff, if they were getting vulgar or saucy?
Yeah, there's certain things I don't. I personally don't like talking about other people on hangouts, so on live hangouts, because it's recorded and it's just I don't.
You'll be held accountable for it.
Well, it's public, and I don't really like to. I don't find it interesting to do so much in private hangouts either. But no, I think there are. I think if something is live and it's out there and it's permanent, you should conduct yourself a little bit more professionally. Shouldn't hold back, obviously, but no, I'm not. I really don't care to criticize people who aren't here to defend themselves when it is out in the open.
Well, I was just thinking about not so much criticism, but like vulgarity and propriety. Have you ever had any issues with that, problems in a live hangout where you felt like, well, maybe we shouldn't be talking about this? Propriety, vulgarity, off color.
I think I was just doing that. I was saying.
Well, I thought you were talking about personal attacks. That's what I thought you were talking about.
Okay, so do I think, like somebody should stand up and flash themselves or something like that?
Well, I mean that's a good example, but I was thinking about somebody was talking about.
And I don't care if you guys talk about other people. I have my own personal code of conduct. If it were my hangout, I would, as the moderator, I would do some quality control. Yes.
Quality control.
Yeah.
So Bunto, are you talking about this if someone comes in and starts saying like dead baby jokes or
Well, yeah, I was just thinking about would there ever be a hangout where you guys would find something objectionable where you would say, please, let's not talk about this now. Let's say somebody wants to bring up dead baby jokes or abortions or explicit sexual references. Would you ever just say, oh, we shouldn't be talking about that? Anything like that?
Well, actually, it depends. If everybody else is in on it and having a good time, then I would say, well, this hangout isn't for me.
Okay.
But if I think everybody else, if it seems really strained, I was on a hangout the other night where I think I asked somebody just point blank to leave. He was just so annoying, and I just said, I'm sorry, would you just leave?
Yeah.
I asked him several times if he was trolling, and he claimed not to be, but he was claiming to be Jesus, and I don't think he was, so I'm not talking about somebody else on a hangout who was really there. But anyway, no, I told him to leave. He was annoying as hell, and I thought he was ruining a perfectly good hangout, and so I did, and it wasn't even my hangout, and I just asked him. I was tired.
And the room's response to that was a little bit lukewarm.
Yeah, it was kind of mixed. They were, I don't know. I guess some of them were amused, but
No, God, I don't want to get people like that in there.
Yeah.
They just they take up the limelight. It's so annoying.
Well, sometimes people are on a mission. You know, I'm coming in here to destroy the hangout. I've noticed that sometimes.
That
Yeah.
too. But
he seemed like a troll.
Just a troll.
Yeah, he was a.
Or he was interested in getting money and women through his.
Well, let me ask you that, Jeff. Let's say you did a live hangout.
And it was going on for 20 minutes.
Right, you had time limit. It was long enough to see if it would develop, and it was going nowhere. So you said,
No, if I were doing a live hangout, which I have yet to do actually on my own, but I would invite certain people, and we'd have a topic, and I would invite people who have a track record of knowing how to conduct themselves.
Intelligence.
Yeah, most people don't want to embarrass themselves in front of the whole world, so it's a non-issue. But if it's open and live, which I guess is possible, then you have people coming in and flashing and trolling and stuff like that. So
I've heard of it, but I've never experienced it. So Jeff, have you ever had somebody say, "I saw you in that hangout"? So blah 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 blah
yes,
blah.
I've had that happen to me.
Oh yeah, tell me about it, Asus, please.
Oh yeah. Well, I just found myself in it. I was actually in the hangout. I didn't know it was gonna go live, but all of a sudden they invited G-Man, and G-Man comes in, and yeah. And so what I did is we were talking about, okay, do babies go to hell or to heaven if they die before knowing Jesus Christ, and G-Man was making doctrinal claims, saying that, this is what the doctrine says. And I actually found a Bible verse, I think Psalms 58:3 or 51:1, something like that basically said that they are born in sin from the time that they are conceived in their mother's womb. And that basically says that you are born in sin, and that would preclude that you wouldn't go to heaven. If you still have sin, if it hasn't been absolved, and you died before it being absolved, then maybe purgatory, right? Purgatory is also a doctrinal idea too. So but yeah. So what happened is that we were talking about that topic with do babies go to heaven? And I threw out that those two quotes, and people thought I did a really good job. All I had to do was just Google up "Do babies go to heaven?" Read a couple of Bible verses, find the one that made most sense for my position, and basically tell the. That's all I did. And G-Man never actually responded directly to.
Oh yes, that'd be surprising.
He just ignored me, and continued debating with the other people, even though everybody in the room was saying, respond to what Isis just said. And he just ignored me pretty much, and because he didn't have anything to say. It was a biblical reference versus a doctrinal, so yeah, I got quite a few kudos for that after.
For your participation, excellent. How about you, Jeff? Anything like that? Jeff Keller fans like to watch?
I've had both. I've had some people who were really.
The haters, Jeff Keller haters.
I had somebody I've had some. Actually, they weren't people who hated me, but people who didn't like what I said on a particular occasion, and then I've had some people that were very happy with what I said, or they saw it and they commented on how they agreed or stuff like that. So I've had both.
Great. Well, I want to thank you, Jeff, for the great interview. I'm going to go ahead and close this hangout now. I welcome all of you for comments, and please have a good week, good weekend. Take care.
All right, Bunto. Thanks for setting this up and for your interest, and I really appreciate it. I'll see you around.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jeff.
All right. Bye.
Take care.